Hi guys, welcome back. In this end of year video, I'm going to be sharing my picks for the best science fiction and fantasy published in 2019 for adult and young adults. So these are in no particular order, but these are my 13 favorites sci-fi fantasy novels published in 2019 that I read in 2019. And I think 7 of them are YA and 6 of them are adult. Let's go ahead and get into these. The only way these are organized is separated into adult and young adult, but otherwise they're in no particular order. First up, let's get into the adult books. My first pick is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I love her as an author, and I think this book is really fantastic. It's set in Mexico during the Jazz Age and draws on Mayan mythology. It follows a young woman who accidentally awakens a death god and has to go on an adventure with him to try to save him and save the world. The writing in this is really beautiful. There's a lot of historical content in here that's super interesting, and it's really rich thematically as well. I think it's well worth checking out. Next up is my personal favorite book of the year. If you follow me regularly, you've probably heard me talk about this quite a bit. It is The Starless C by Erin Morgenstern. I do have a full video review of this book, which I will link up above if you guys want to check it out, but I absolutely loved it. It is a slower paced, more character-driven book with lots of pieces that fit together over time. It has a lot of mythology in it, and in some ways it is a love letter to storytelling in all of its forms. This was kind of my perfect book, and I already want to reread it. Then I have a couple of books that are quite polarizing. People seem to love them or hate them, but I was a fan of both of them. First up being Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is her adult debut novel. It is kind of a literary urban fantasy set at Yale involving secret societies. It's definitely slower paced. There's a lot of description of Yale and the locations, and I love that. Some people don't really like that writing style, but I really enjoyed it, and I loved the themes that she was dealing with here, even if the content does definitely get very, very dark and gritty at times, so check content warnings for it, but I was a fan. This deals a lot with power and gender and sexual abuse and gaslighting and the ways that powerful people and powerful institutions will sometimes cover up things that happen. Yeah, this is, like I said, been quite a polarizing book. People seem to love it or hate it, but I really loved it and connected with it. I will also say I listened to this on audio, and I think that maybe had a positive impact on my experience based on talking to other people, so I might recommend trying the audiobook if you're planning on picking it up. Next is another quite polarizing book that people seem to love or hate. This is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. I absolutely fell in love with this. It was just so much fun. Totally worked for me, but I get why it is not everybody's cup of tea. This is being pitched as lesbian necromancers in space. It also includes a very snarky heroine, a good dose of body horror, and a closed circle murder mystery. I thought this was a whole lot of fun. I just really, really enjoyed it. One thing that I will say about Gideon the Ninth, and similarly actually with Ninth House, with Starless C, with a couple of other books on this list, is some people call the writing a little bit pretentious and feel like there's too many pieces that don't necessarily come together, and that annoys people. I kind of like fitting the puzzle pieces together myself. I enjoy that. I don't necessarily need everything laid out for me right away. I'm okay with also not all my questions being answered here. I'm excited to read book 2, but again, your mileage is going to vary depending on the kind of reader that you are and whether the tone of this appeals to you. If you can, I would say maybe try it from your library and see if you get along with the tone of voice and with Gideon as a main character. If you love her, you're probably going to love the book, but if you don't get along with it, you might not. So yeah, but I was a fan and I think it's really great. Next is another fantasy debut that I really enjoyed. This is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix E. Harrow. This one came out through Orbit, and it is a portal fantasy book set in the United States in the early 1900s. It deals a lot with race and identity and family, and I just really loved the way that it tackled so many issues. The prose in this book is stunning. I just thought it was so beautiful, and I loved the way that it all came together. I think it's a really solid debut, and I look forward to reading more from Alix E. Harrow. I think we're gonna get some really, really great stuff from her. And my final pick for adult sci-fi fantasy is In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire. This is the latest installment of the Wayward Children series. although we have another one coming out very, very soon, which I'm super excited about. In general, I love this series, and this one I did give 5 stars to. It's another one that people like, love, or hate, depending on how they feel about the themes that are being addressed here. It really worked for me. This is the backstory of Lundy, who is the therapist in the first book in the series, and it really worked for me. I loved it a whole lot, and it was among my favorites of the year. Moving on, let's talk about my favorite sci-fi fantasy books for YA, and as you will notice, most of these are fantasy, but we do have one kind of sci-fi in here. My first pick here is Kingsbane by Claire Legrand. This is the sequel to Furyborn. It is an epic fantasy trilogy that is very queer and fiercely feminist and has 2 perspectives with 2 queens set 1,000 years apart, one who is supposed to save everyone and one who's supposed to ruin everyone. There were so many twists and turns in this, and it got really dark and crazy, and I just loved it, and I cannot wait to read this finale next year. It's gonna be really great. Although depending on when this video goes up, it could be this year if we're already in 2020. But yeah, this was definitely one of my favorites. Next is a book that I just haven't shut up about all year long and have gotten lots of people to read with positive results, I will say, which I'm very happy about. This is The Kingdom by Jess Rothenberg, and this is the only sort of sci-fi book in the list of YA ones, but I loved this. I think it's so smart. It's such a page turner. It's kind of a mix of sci-fi and mystery. It's set at a futuristic theme park that's sort of like Disneyland on steroids, and follows an android princess. They don't call them princesses, but they're basically like Disney princess androids that exist to make people's dreams come true in this park, and as you can tell, things get quite dark and creepy. But then this android princess is on murder for trial. So there are questions. Did she commit the murder? And if she did, can she be convicted of murder since she's AI? It's really, really good, guys. I loved it. I have an in-depth review of this that I'll link up above where you guys can check it out. It's spoiler-free, but it gets into all of the rich sort of thematic stuff that's in here and why I loved it so much. Definitely recommend it. Next is one of my favorite books of this year, and one that I think is really underrated. I love it so much. It is a dark fantasy romance. This is Beyond the Black Door by A.M. Strickland. I just gobbled this book up. I think it's so great, and it also has really great queer representation. Our main character in the story is asexual, biromantic, and this book does such a great job of really getting at the differences between interest in sex and interest in romance and gender expression. I just absolutely love that element of it, and it's also such a page turner. I like could not put it down, and I was living for this like dark kind of toxic romance. The thing that I love about this, especially for a YA audience, is it explores the fact that you can't always control who you fall in love with, but you can control what you choose to do about it. And most of us at some point have fallen for somebody who maybe wasn't the best choice. So yeah, I really, really loved this a whole lot. It follows a girl who has inherited the ability to soul walk from her mom. And soul walking is when you sleep near a person physically and you can enter their soul and suss out their secrets while they're dreaming. Her mom does this by working as a high-end sex worker and then getting people's secrets to sell, but she's got to find her own path because she's not interested in sex. The other twist, and the thing that really drives the page-turning nature of this, is that ever since she was a little girl, every time she soul walked, there was a mysterious black door that followed her around, and her mom always told her, never open the black door. It's dangerous, never open it. So of course the day comes, eventually years later, when she does open the black door. And so the question then becomes, what in fact is beyond the black door, and what happens when she opens it? It's really, really good, guys, and I hope more people will go and pick it up. I loved it. Next up is a YA debut that I had been highly anticipating, and I really ended up enjoying it a lot. This is A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy. This is being pitched as a North African-inspired fantasy novel, and it's just so good and rich and gets dark. The characters are really interesting. The plot is really interesting. It's got political intrigue. It's got sisters who have to fight to the death to become queen, which we've seen in some ways before, but this is definitely a fresh and different take on it. It has a slow burn romance that never really takes center stage. I loved the main character, and it has a lot to do with like complicated family relationships, which I think really makes sense for a YA book. The world building is great, it is casually diverse, and it was just one that I wanted to keep reading once I started it. So I really loved it. I'm excited to read the sequel, and I think she is one to watch as a new fantasy author. Next up is another debut that I really loved, and honestly, this is probably my top pick for something that I would love to see be made into a television show. This is The Good Luck Girls by Charlotte Nicole Davis. It is a fantasy western that is awesome, that features a girl gang out for revenge, angry ghosts, a heist, and queer romance. I really enjoyed this. It's very fast-paced and fun. The world is really interesting. I do wish that we had gotten the world building in this fleshed out a little bit more, but I still really loved it and would love to see more in this world, would love to see it turned into a television series. It feels so cinematic and it would be awesome. So yeah, definitely recommend checking that one out. All right, and lastly we come to two of the most controversial books on this list. We've had a couple of others I've mentioned that have been very polarizing. These two books are also very polarizing. People kind of like love them or hate them, and I happen to love them. First up, we have my favorite YA fantasy romance of the year. This is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. While I don't think this book as a high fantasy novel is perfect, I love it as a fantasy romance. Like if you kind of think of this more in terms of genre romance, it is so good, especially if you like the tropes that it's playing with. I was kind of living for it. It features a mix of marriage of convenience plot and an enemies to lovers, and we also get a steamier scene in this book where the guy is the one who is a virgin, and I was so here for it. I thought it was just really great, really fun. This is kind of a polarizing book. Not everybody likes it very much, and I see where there are some weaknesses, but as a fantasy romance, I think it is top-notch, and I'm excited to see what else we get from Shelby Mahurin. And the final book that I'm going to put on this list is another one that is pretty controversial, and in this case, I think it might be because it was mismarketed, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. This is The Beautiful by Renee Adieh. So I absolutely love this, but I understand why some people didn't or were really disappointed with it. It was really pitched more as a return to vampires and paranormal romance, and while there are vampires in it, they aren't named on the page until very late in the book, and really what this book is more of is a historical mystery. So you kind of have to put a lot of different pieces and clues together. A lot of the world building doesn't kind of make a lot of sense until pretty late on in the book, and that's because it's more of a mystery than it is a paranormal romance, but I loved it. I thought the writing was beautiful and lush. It's set in New Orleans in the 1800s, and it deals with a lot of really interesting themes. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on this, I will link my review video up above where I get a little bit more in depth in it. But I was a fan, and I'm really excited to see where she goes with the second book. So there you have it. Those are my picks for the 13 best sci-fi fantasy releases of 2019. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on the books that I talked about. Did you agree with me? Did you disagree? Feel free to chat about it in the comments down below. And for your question of the day, tell me one of your picks for best sci-fi fantasy novel published in 2019. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.